Good afternoon, everyone. It's so nice to see you on the second day of the Paris Fintech Forum. My name is Edward Robinson. I'm a senior writer with Bloomberg News. I cover fintech, and it is my honor and pleasure to have Gottfried Leibbrandt, the CEO of Swift, which is the, how should we say it? It's the circulatory system for the world economy. How does that sound? Swift, of course, has been around for 40 years, and this is the way correspondent banks basically transmit messages and transmit money around the world for corporates, consumers, et cetera. It is a crucial piece of the global economy's infrastructure. And before we plunge right in, Gottfried, I just have to ask you about the necktie.
Thank you.
What's up with that?
I don't know. I packed my necktie and I was wearing it this morning and I sort of kept it on. I asked myself, should I take it off? And then there's too many people I see taking off their neckties because it's innovation, right? It's innovation, fintech. Let's take off our tie and be innovative. But there's also a deeper reason, I think, why I was asking myself, why do I have that resentment to take it off?
Yeah.
I've seen also cases in the past where people said, well, let's do innovation on the side. Let's have a sandbox where we do innovation, etc. And I am completely convinced that the incumbents or the existing players are only going to survive if they bring innovation to their core business. If they really start asking questions across the whole business system and innovate, use the technology to really innovate themselves at their core instead of keeping it a peripheral thing that sort of you dabble in. So
leave your necktie on and innovate. Yeah, exactly. Okay, that's good. Well, let's begin then with that theme of innovation. I mean, Swift, I'm sure everybody in this room knows Swift has been part of the infrastructure in the correspondent banking system since the 1970s. And the correspondent banking system itself is this organic entity that has developed during the Renaissance. And this is how banks send money to one another on behalf of their clients. And in the 1970s, banks got together and said, let's form a consortium, let's form a group that will standardize the way we do this. We'll use the latest technology to help speed along the transmission of money and payments. And over the years, things have changed. We heard this morning, there was Peter Randall kind of walked through a whole iteration of different technological changes that have occurred in the capital markets and banking. And I think over the years, Swift has come to be kind of a byword for non-innovation. I mean, it wasn't keeping up with the times. It was kind of something that wasn't keeping up with the internet. And I'm sure, I mean, there's been lots of critiques and so forth. And this is something that you've had to kind of deal with as the CEO of Swift. Like, everybody's always getting down on Swift and complaining about it and so forth, about its limitations. But then in the last couple of years, things started changing at the organization, and there was a crash program, which came to be known as GPI, in an effort to really upgrade the way this system works and the way money moves around the world. Tell us about GPI, how that developed, and where you are now.
So thank you. You more or less summarized it. And indeed, what we did 40 years ago was replace the telex with an electronic network. And I think a lot of the innovation we have done since then is really at that information layer. So integrating the network into the back office of banks, making it STP, and our biggest banks now do 1,000 or 1 million transactions a day, which are all automated, go straight from the back office over the network to their correspondent banks. But we never really touched the layer which our banks do between themselves, which is the mutual accounts they hold, the market practices around that, etc. And the frustration of everybody, including myself, is, if I wire money through the banking system, it takes days. I don't know where the money is, and the fee structure is unpredictable, to say the least. At the end of the day, that's been a frustration. I remember I had joined Swift 12 years ago. And there was a Sybos where the opening speaker said, guys, this is the world of UPS. I know where my package is. I can track my parcel if it goes through FedEx. Why can't I track my payment, and how come you guys can't fix that? And I remember diving in. I was head of strategy at the time, really seeing whether we could solve this. And it turned out that with the technology at the time, it was just not possible. Now, we did it again 2 years ago, and with API technology, which is, I would say, revolutionary, and perhaps even more revolutionary from what I see right now than blockchain. But can come back to that. With that technology, you could solve the problem. I think the other thing that changed is with real innovation threatening the business model of the banks, we found the banks willing to take action on this one. So the combination of the availability of technology and a real groundswell in the industry to say, guys, we now got to attack this, allowed us to roll out GPI. What it does is it tracks the payment end to end. It identifies a payment end to end across all the banks in the chain.
Like a UPS package.
Like a UPS package, but it also, and that's an important one, it's a set of SLAs between the bank to, as soon as they get the money from the previous banks, they credit the next bank in the chain or credit the customer account. The upshot is that we now, for GPI payments, they're processed in all of them in less than a day and half of them in less than an hour. So that is a complete revolution compared to the days that you're used to. There's transparency on fees. You can predict how much money is going to come out at the other end of the pipe, and you can track it. You can add information to it. Where now the pickup of that has been much faster than we had anticipated. We now have 15% of our global correspondent banking transactions, one way or another, linked to the GPI platform. The biggest corridor, by the way, is US-China.
All right.
And that's an interesting story in itself. We've seen the big money center bank embrace this, so Citi, JP Morgan, etc. The other big pickup has been in China, where I think part of the explanation is they have seen the revolution that's happened in retail payments, and that's an interesting story in itself. In China, at the point of sale, I was telling the other day, a comparison in Germany, at the point of sale, 2/3 of the payments are cash and the other third are cards, debit cards, credit cards, and a number of other schemes. In China, it is now 1/3 cash, 3% cards, and 2/3 are essentially Alipay and WeChat. That didn't exist 3 or 4 years ago. So that has completely revolutionized, and this is not a small market, 1.4 billion inhabitants, 2/3 at the point of sale use their mobile and Alipay and WeChat, catching the banks, I would say, completely off guard. So the banks in China have seen what payment revolutions can do, and they're intent on not letting this happen to global correspondent banking. So they've been really embracing this, and driven by those two big axes, we're seeing tremendous traction. And for me, it's very energizing because we are now not just revolutionizing the information layer, but really the way correspondent banking, which, as you said, has been around since the Medicis, really how that is happening between banks. And we'll see. It's also a classic game of what I tried to make with the tie. It's innovating the core business and really going back to your core business and not waiting for others to do it on the side or taking away your business. Innovate your core value proposition, and that for me is an exciting thing.
Good. Well, the flip side to innovation is security.
Yep.
And I think many of us are familiar with the spectacular heist in February of 2016 when a group of cyber thieves basically they stole about close to $100 million out of the Central Bank of Bangladesh, and they used the SWIFT messaging protocol as part of their crime. Kind of walk us through how your members have responded to this attack and what changes you've made.
Yeah, so for us this was about endpoint security, and we have 10,000 banks on the network that sort of run their own SWIFT terminal to enter the payments or in an STP way. This was a compromise of the local bank environment where they found a way to compromise the keys to that system and then insert these payments. It's interesting because we see the same thing happening in crypto with the CoinCheck heist, which was $500 million, by the way. So
this is the one in Japan over the weekend?
Over the weekend, six Bangladeshis. It's not the core blockchain that got hacked, but it's the entry points, i.e. the exchanges. So for us, that was a big challenge because that means how do you secure 10,000 local bank environments? To do that, we have launched a big program to help the banks secure themselves, and that consists of a number of things. Information sharing about the compromises that we're aware of, better tools, but also a set of controls around their environment that they have to comply with. And then we said, one thing that will make mandatory as of the end of last year is at least you have to share with your correspondents, the banks you do business with, what your compliance with these controls is. So then your correspondent can decide to do business with you, put in additional receiver controls, maybe not do certain high-value transactions if they think your compliance with the controls is not good enough. And we've really driven that together with our banks at the end of the day. And that has led to over 90% of our banks now being compliant, having self-attested, having shared these this compliance. That's a good program. It's not done yet because by the end of this year they'll have to be compliant with all the controls, not just publish their compliance, but really be compliant with the controls. So that's a continuing journey. The other good side benefit is for many banks, this is now their first entry into cyber, right? They are starting to realize, wow, if I have to secure my SWIFT environment, maybe I should have a look at my core banking environment as well, and how do I beef up security, especially in more vulnerable markets, especially for banks that traditionally haven't had a cyber culture like some of the big banks.
But this remains kind of the Achilles heel of the correspondent banking structure, doesn't it? Is that you can put these programs in place and urge your members to adopt, and there is a bit of a mandatory element there. But ultimately, the system is only as strong as its weakest link.
And that is, I mean, banking, I mean, we saw with the financial crisis, banking is an interlinked system. There's such a thing as systemic risk. So I think the banking system as a whole has to take this very seriously, and I think that doesn't just go for SWIFT. I mean, the same debate you can have about the accounts that they hold for customers. Security is the key business of banks, right? That's what they've done for ages. That's why they have secure environments. That's why they have vaults. That's why they have security guards in branches and all of these things. And now they have to take that to the cyber age. If they're going to stay in banking, security has to be part of what they do, including.
And I imagine, I mean, it's kind of a cat and mouse game, isn't it? That the cyber thieves, they'll come up with something new, something innovative.
Absolutely.
In their approach.
Yeah.
And explain to us, if you could, how you stay on top of that. How does your cybersecurity team kind of address that?
So we stay, a lot of it, how we stay on top of it is the information sharing with our member banks. So we launched, and information sharing is a hot topic and not an easy one. There's lots of information sharing at the national level through FS-ISAC in various countries, notably the US and the UK. We launched a thing called SWIFT-ISAC, information sharing, and we do that globally. So for the SWIFT layer of the system, banks globally now share indications of compromise, techniques and protocols and modus operandi. We publish that on an anonymous basis in a database for all our members, so you can stay abreast of what are the latest evolutions, etc. The other big thing I think that has been quite successful is cooperation with the antivirus providers. So the McAfee's, the Kaspersky's, etc. Symantec, where we feed the indications of compromise into their environment. They can then alert people to the latest tools and techniques that are happening. So it's a whole ecosystem approach at the end of the day to stay ahead.
Well, even as you're advancing on the cybersecurity side and on the innovation side, there's been a whole explosion of new companies coming in that are vowing to create correspondent banking 2.0. That for all of the change that you may be trying to affect at SWIFT, this is old-fashioned. It's time to take a great leap forward and do something new. Perhaps Ripple is the most famous at this point of the new upstarts that want to change this system on a global level. What do you think? I mean, is the blockchain can that revolutionize correspondent banking? Is that the answer?
I'm not sure that's the answer, but I mean, listen, this is an innovative world. I think you do see the traditional distinctions between, traditional you had a distinction between wholesale and retail and between cross-border and domestics. I think that is blurring. One notable development is real-time payment systems. They start as retail, but why can't you use that at a certain moment for wholesale as well? There's a whole slew of people who are taking a look at that layer in between the card payments that are typically around €50 and wholesale payments that are closer to 10,000 plus euro. There's the worker remittances cross-border space of about €1,000 in terms of value, or dollars in terms of value of transactions. That has traditionally not been very well served by the banking system. For anybody who's tried to wire 500 to another country, that's not an easy thing, which is why you have Western Union or MoneyGram. That is a space where you see TransferWise, I mean, I can Zoom, PayPal, so there's a whole host of people taking a look at that. The card companies are taking a look at that. I think it's the banks to lose, and that's why one of the things for GPI is to see if we can make that experience better as well. Is crypto and blockchain the answer? I think it may be part of the answer. For me right now, APIs is a much bigger part of the answer. That's really making a lot of these things possible.
So you made a strategic decision to say, let's go with existing technology when it came to GPI.
Because, I mean, at the same time, we've run a number of proof of concepts on blockchain. We've done nostro-vostro reconciliation on blockchain. We've done standing settlements on blockchain. We've done a bond lifecycle on blockchain. We are not seeing a lot of take-up of banks, partly because it's a chicken and egg problem. It's an installed base thing. Guys, what does it really solve? And we have lots of other challenges on our plate. We'll see. For me, the interesting question is, if somebody were to crack not having Bitcoin or new currencies on a blockchain, but to have existing currencies on a blockchain, if you were to have crypto dollars issued by banks or even by central banks, then you could see a whole new set of solutions come. You could really move dollars in
a digital form of sterling, a digital form of the greenback, et cetera.
Now that is still a way off, I think.
Yeah.
If that were to happen, you know, a lot of things would become different. I'm looking here at Dirk, by the way, who's sort of working on that one, and Peter Randall is one of the one of the ones who's working on that one as well. We'll see where that goes. Yeah. But right now, I think blockchain is more an enabling technology,
so Swift is studying blockchain at this time. Now, Brad Garlinghouse, the CEO of Ripple, he characterized GPI
sixth
as
largest man in the U.S., sixth richest man in the U.S.
I think for a moment there he was, wasn't he? XRP, yeah.
For a brief moment.
But he described GPI as a horse and buggy, and Ripple is an automobile. I think he wanted to say race car, but he said automobile. I mean, what do you make of that? I mean, he's basically saying that you're still outdated, even though you've done this crash program.
Yeah, let's see. We'll see. We could also. There's many analogies you could use. My favorite analogy right now is I drive an electric car, a Tesla, I have to say, and that's an interesting one. You could say Tesla is the future, and the old cars are the past. I have to say, it's a beautiful experience to have an electric car. I love the concept, but it's still an American car, and I can say if I could get a German car with German engineering and the electrical thing, that would be my choice. So if I could get correspondent banking and get the new technology inside, maybe that would be a good thing. The other thing he said is this is a classic David Goliath thing.
He did?
Well, if I'm now facing somebody who, through this crypto thing, is sitting on 100 billion in war chest and has unlimited funding, you know, who's the Goliath out here? But, and well, I'm just a banking cooperative.
He'd have to convert that to fiat, and I think that would be interesting to kind of see that develop.
That would be a challenge.
But just a little bit about why cryptocurrencies. I mean, you've said this; they won't work in the cross-border payment system at this time.
Well, I think there was a recent article in which people asked banks, are they ready to embrace crypto? And the issue is with that volatility that they have right now. It's the volatility. It's also the AML part of it. It was interesting. I had somebody come up at this conference to me and say, listen, have you experience with people who look at the blockchain and the transaction patterns to sort of spot good Bitcoins from bad Bitcoins, AML on the blockchain? Not easy, partly because there's a whole slew of technologies to obfuscate the provenance of Bitcoin, right? If you pay ransomware, you would like to trace your coin to be able to get back your ransom later. There's essentially a number of technologies that slice and dice it to the extent that you cannot trace individual Bitcoin. So there's a number of people who try to really obfuscate Bitcoin, which makes AML in these crypto and the whole compliance a nightmare. So that's, I think, the other reason why. So it's a combination of volatility and the inability to do money laundering, anti-money laundering, and KYC checks on these things.
So for all of the innovation that's taking place in the blockchain space, DLT, crypto, where all of those things intersect when it comes to cross-border payments, your members, the world's biggest banks, medium-sized banks, et cetera, they're still not comfortable with that, and they would much prefer to use the cloud, APIs, existing technology. I
think that would be, but again, I mean, I cannot predict the future, so we are looking at blockchain. I have a big team that is trying these proof of concepts, really versatile in the technology, etc. And who knows? The next phase after APIs, maybe that somebody finds good applications for it. We're going to be watching. I mean, Cybos this year is an interesting one. You should all come there. It will be in Sydney later this year. In Sydney is where Australia is where the biggest experiment in banking blockchain is happening right now. ASX, the Australia exchange.
Is that the real-time exchange? Or?
One is the real-time. That's not blockchain.
Oh, you're talking about with
but I'm talking about Live Masters and digital assets who are putting the CSD on the blockchain. That will be a very interesting one to see how that's happening.
Why is that relevant to you?
Well, first of all, we connect a number of CSDs to the SWIFT network. So a lot of global custody, half of what we do on the network is payments instructions. The other half are global custody, cross-border custody instructions that flow over it. So we connect many of these CSDs to the custodians. But in general, it's a very interesting one to see if blockchain can really take an existing value chain and revolutionize it. And that will be, so we'll all be convening in
So the
Australia
Australian
later.
Stock Exchange experiment that Digital Asset Holdings, Blythe Masters company is doing, that
is one to watch.
Very
Absolutely.
much on your radar.
Absolutely, absolutely.
I see. That is one of the most interesting tests out there right now. Excellent. Well, Gottfried, I just want to thank you again. It's been a pleasure to conduct this interview here at the Paris FinTech Forum. Thank you so much. Please, a hand for Gottfried Leibbrandt of Swift.
Thank you.